Welcome. My name is Grace Shimizu, and on behalf of the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project and the Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans, I'd like to thank you for joining in. We very much appreciate the Tadaima pilgrimage for providing us this opportunity to bring attention to the little-known wartime history of Japanese Latin Americans and our ongoing justice struggle. This is an essential part of preserving and sharing our family stories to protect and ensure that our voices are no longer silenced and that our narratives are not marginalized or erased. It is our legacy, the legacy of our families, our communities, our nations during wartime, the aftermath, and our ongoing struggle for justice, which are being passed on. We do this not to idealize or romanticize our past, but to learn from the past, to draw lessons so that we can effectively envision and build a better world for all humanity, with peace, truth, justice, genuine security and well-being, and solidarity. And in the spirit of solidarity and the indivisibility of justice, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Native peoples of the Americas who have been and continue to be stewards of this land which was taken under unjust and violent circumstances, resulting in forced relocation, imprisonment, family separation and dispersal, and genocide that continues to have devastating effects on indigenous communities. I also acknowledge and pay respect to all those who have fallen to racial violence, especially due to the actions and policies of the U.S. government, whether in the U.S. or in other nations. The historic resistance and gains of Blacks in the United States have given rise to the current advances being made by Black Lives Matter and are resounding around the world. These histories and present experiences are essential to understanding the context of the Nikkei experience in the Americas and the significance of the Nikkei experience to current events. Last week's session was entitled Hostages in a Foreign Land, The Hidden History of Japanese Latin Americans, presented by Becky Shibayama and Kazumu Julio Cesar Naganuma. Today's presentation is entitled The Continuing Fight for Japanese Latin Americans. We'll look not only at the history of this decades-long fight for justice, but also we'll be talking about history in the making. And what's the most recent development? Well, today we are very happy to announce that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights ruled in favor of the Shibayama brothers' petition for justice. This decision is a milestone victory and so important for the next stage of our struggle. With that as a teaser, we will start with a brief video clip with an overview of our Japanese Latin American wartime history and our struggle for truth and justice, particularly our efforts at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to hold the U.S. government accountable for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Then we will hear from some speakers about why this decision by the Commission is a significant milestone in our justice struggle and what the decision means to our former Japanese Peruvian internees and our families, especially the Shibayama family. And we will also hear from activists in the Japanese American and other communities about why this decision and Japanese Latin American redress struggle are important and relevant today, as well as what are the next steps in our ongoing struggle for truth and justice.
Art Shibayama was just 13 years old and living comfortably in Peru when he was forced out of the only home he had ever known. During World War II, the United States government, in collaboration with several Latin American countries, orchestrated the forced removal and internment of over 2,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, which included both citizens of 13 Latin American countries as well as Japanese immigrants. Like young Art Shibayama, the vast majority were Japanese Peruvians. Shortly after the Japanese military attack on Pearl Harbor, community leaders were scapegoated and rounded up for detention throughout the Americas. In Peru, a blacklist had been generated. While not based on any real or credible evidence of Japanese subversive activity, the blacklist targeted businessmen, community leaders, and educators. In collaboration with Peruvian officials, the U.S. used the blacklist as the basis for rounding up hostages. These hostages were then to be traded for Americans held by Japan. Most of the Japanese Latin Americans were interned in a Department of Justice camp at Crystal City, Texas. But for Art and the other internees, their long ordeal did not end with the close of World War II. The remaining Japanese Latin Americans were told that they were illegal aliens and would be deported. And because the Latin American governments initially refused to allow these internees to return, over 1,000 were thus deported to war-devastated Japan.
The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
However, Art was denied justice. Under this law, Japanese Latin Americans were deemed ineligible for redress as they were not U.S. citizens or residents at the time of internment. In an effort to call attention to their hidden history and to support efforts for redress, the Campaign for Justice was formed.
The Campaign for Justice started in 1996, and it was founded by individuals and organizations who wanted to seek redress for Japanese Latin Americans.
In response to public pressure, the Department of Justice offered a settlement of only $5,000 each, just 1/4 of the $20,000 redress provided to the Japanese Americans. While supporting the decision of those who accepted the settlement, Art Shibayama, along with several others, chose to opt out of the settlement. He then filed his own lawsuit, preferring to fight for both redress and a full disclosure of the violations committed by the United States during World War II. Despite his efforts, Art was once again denied justice. His case was dismissed in the final months of 2002.
You know, it's not like we wanted to come here. We didn't want to come here. We were forced to come here. We were brought here by the government. So how can that be illegal?
What struck me when I first got involved in that case was how dare the United States forum shop and looked for people who looked Japanese because they didn't think they could exchange American-born Japanese for non-Asian POWs held in Japan. So they shopped and found Latin Americans of Japanese ancestry, and a number of them were sent to Japan in exchange for non-Asian American POWs. I just found that situation totally outrageous, and I was stunned that I knew nothing about it. And I work in human rights.
My family and I are very proud of my father for his pursuit for justice and for his courage to hold the U.S. government accountable for its wrongdoing. Despite my father's and others' efforts to educate the American public, the Japanese-Peruvian internment is still widely unknown. We need the U.S. government to apologize and acknowledge what it did. We need educational funds, and we need full disclosure. So what happened to the Japanese Peruvians will not happen to my family, to any other family, or to any other group again.
Hi, I'm Natsu Saito. I'm a law professor at Georgia State University in Atlanta, and I wanted to say congratulations to the Shibayama family and to the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project for their recent victory before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in the Shibayama case. It's very difficult to get a case heard by the Inter-American Commission because, as you can imagine, there are a lot of human rights violations in the Americas. This opinion came down 17 years after the case was originally filed. And it tells us that the claims of the Shibayama brothers are really serious, fundamental violations of human rights. There are many violations of human rights in this case of Japanese Latin Americans who are kidnapped, transported against their will to another country, indefinitely incarcerated, essentially rendered stateless. But the Inter-American Commission couldn't directly address most of those underlying claims because it only has jurisdiction over violations that are committed after 1951, when the United States became a party to the Charter of the Organization of American States. So the Commission could only directly address the exclusion of the Japanese Latin Americans from the redress provided to Japanese Americans under the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. But in doing so, the Commission concluded that the United States had violated 2 articles of the American Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man, which is the most fundamental articulation of human rights in the American human rights system. One was Article 2 of the Declaration, which protects equality under law without distinction as to race, sex, language, creed, or any other factor. And also Article 18, which ensures the right to a fair trial. Specifically, it says that everyone should have access to a simple, brief procedure whereby the courts protect people from acts of authority that violate any fundamental constitutional right. In this decision, the Inter-American Commission emphasizes that the principles of equality before the law, equal protection, and non-discrimination are among the most basic human rights and are in fact recognized by the Inter-American Court as jus cogens norms because the whole legal structure of national and international public order rests on it. Jus cogens norms are the most fundamental norms that cannot be derogated from even in times of emergency, things like the prohibition on slavery or on genocide. So they're saying that equal protection, equality before the law, which we know is a very significant issue right now in our country, is an absolute bedrock fundamental norm. The Commission said that one of the objectives of the American Declaration was to assure in principle the equal protection of the law to nationals and aliens alike in respect to the rights set forth. It says that any permissible distinctions have to be based on an objective and reasonable justification. They have to further a legitimate objective, regard being had to the principles which normally prevail in democratic societies, and using means that are reasonable and proportionate to the ends being sought. This, too, is a really important finding for any of us who are concerned about the rights of non-citizens in the U.S. today. The Commission also says that states not only have the paramount responsibility to conduct themselves so as to ensure the full and free exercise of human rights, but also a duty under established principles of international law to provide adequate and effective remedies for any violations that do occur. In other words, states have an obligation to provide redress, or what we often call reparations, for wrongs that have occurred, even if they occurred a long time in the past. So going forward, the Commission reiterates its earlier recommendations, which thus far have been ignored by the United States. and it had two recommendations. The first is to make integral reparation for the human rights violations established in this report, including both the material and moral dimensions, and adopt measures for economic compensation and measures of satisfaction. In other words, the United States still owes redress to the Shibayamas and to other Japanese Latin Americans who suffered similar treatment, and in economic terms, but not only in economic terms. The Commission also recognizes how difficult it has been to get information about the internment and urges the United States to adopt the necessary measures to ensure full disclosure of governmental information relating to the program of deportation and internment of Japanese Latin Americans during World War II, as well as information about the fates of the individuals who are subject to this program. This is really a groundbreaking decision of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. It affirms the claims of Japanese Latin Americans who have struggled for justice for 75 years and reaffirms the obligations of the United States government to provide both access to information about and meaningful, quote, material and moral redress for long-standing violations of human rights.
My family and I are very happy and thankful that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights ruled in favor of my father Isamu Art Shibayama and uncles Kenichi and Takeshi. Unfortunately, this victory is bittersweet since the decision was not made during my father's lifetime. However, the long-awaited ruling was foreseeable since the evidence was clearly in our favor. Needless to say, it is extremely aggravating and disappointing that the U.S. government still has not acknowledged nor provided proper reparations for the war crimes committed against our family and over 2,200 Japanese Latin Americans. And we cannot forget the thousands of men, women, and children of German, Italian, Jewish, and Japanese ancestry from Latin America and the U.S., including U.S. citizens who were imprisoned and used in the hostage exchanges. Until there is proper redress and justice, these crimes against humanity are ongoing. My father, aunts, and uncles, grandparents, and great-grandparents suffered greatly at the hands of the U.S. government. They had done nothing wrong, yet they lost everything. They lost their homes, businesses, and financial security, their community and their country, their freedom and dignity and bright promise for the future. My great-grandparents were used in one of the hostage exchanges and sent to war-devastated Japan, where they wound up living in squalor. After my grandfather and his family were released from Crystal City, my grandfather spent the rest of his life trying to regain all that he had lost in Peru, and sadly, he never did. My father and his siblings were mere children, ranging in age from 5 to 13, when they were kidnapped and imprisoned, and they were robbed of their childhood and education. My father fought for justice for the Japanese Latin Americans for decades, until his passing in 2018. He was determined that no other family experienced the same injustices and hardships that his family was forced to overcome. Our hope is that this published ruling can help lead to no more government-orchestrated kidnappings, indefinite detention, family separation, forced deportations, and no more children in today's detention camps. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chieko Kamisato, and I was born in Lima, Peru, and we were interned in Crystal City, Texas during World War II from 1943 to 1946. The memory that I have is, how, they took my father, to prison, and which it was devastating. And then they sent him to labor, prisoner of war camp in Panama. And then we arrived the family was also allowed to join the father. In camp life, everything was given to us. Everything was controlled. It was like a little city and we had nothing to worry about. But once we left camp, we were left alone. They said, okay, you're on your own. And and then being in the strange country, not knowing the language, it was very difficult, especially for our parents, because, they had to start all over again. And then coming into this life where they had to really start from nothing, it was just devastating for them. And this is where our real trouble, our struggle began, not only for us, but for everybody that left camp. We all suffered, we all went through the same thing. And it was all very difficult. And I think the younger generation should know what's happened and what went on with our lives. And I think it's a very important part of history. And I don't think it should be, just gone away. I think it should be told and retold and retold. And then, for the next generation to come and to see what had happened to us. So it won't happen again. This shouldn't happen again to anybody. And I don't think it was right for them to do that. And I don't think it's right for anybody to do this in the future, which sometimes I feel like it's happening again, but it shouldn't be.
I want to congratulate the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project on the report and recommendations from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights regarding their petition filed on behalf of the Shibayama brothers for violations of their human rights during World War II. While Japanese Americans were granted monetary redress with the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, the Shibayama brothers were denied access because they were neither citizens or permanent residents. The human rights finding, however, evoked the principle of equality before the law in recognizing that the Shibayama brothers were in fact deprived of their human rights. And in fact, their status as illegal immigrants was created by the politics of war, the racist policies, and blatant indifference to their humanity. The petition was filed in 2003 with the hopes that an international body would adjudicate justice that was not forthcoming in the United States. While it has taken some time for the process to wind its way down the road to justice, it is a timely report for the U.S. reality we're living in today, with cries for justice in the Black community, migrants seeking access across the southern border, and bans on Muslim countries. The words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. echo today that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. King often also reminded advocates that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The report provides an international perspective that bends the arc of the moral universe, seeking justice in the place where the injustice occurred, the United States of America. May we celebrate the victory with the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project and pledge our solidarity moving forward to their next steps on that path towards justice.
My name is Mia Summers. I use they, she pronouns. I'm a descendant of Heart Mountain and Tule Lake concentration camp survivors and am currently an organizer with Nikkei Resistors. I'm thrilled by this long-awaited ruling by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in recognizing the experiences of Japanese Latin American incarcerees during World War II. As someone who has benefited from reparations for World War II mass incarceration, I'm urging the United States government to officially recognize the injustices and violation of human rights they enacted on Japanese Latin Americans and provide redress and reparations for Japanese Latin Americans and their descendants, as was given to my family. However, I know this is not enough. We must all use this moment to interrogate the validity of an entire system that is able to target, incarcerate, deport, and murder communities of color. We cannot stop at apologies, but instead must begin to build something better, so that these systems of incarceration are completely removed from our communities and ways of being. Love and liberation to Japanese Latin Americans. Power to the people.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Miho Kim, and I'm a founding member of the San Francisco Comfort Women Justice Coalition. First of all, congratulations to the Shibayama brothers and all the members of the Japanese Latin American community for winning this historic, momentous victory from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Not many people know about this pretty obscure institution, but it's one of the very few multilateral entities to which the United States is beholden in terms of its human rights performances and compliances. This kind of a story cannot simply be forgotten. And why does it matter to all of us? Why does it matter to us, CWJC, which continues to fight in solidarity with the surviving comfort women who were made into mere instruments to fulfill sexual desires of hundreds and thousands of Japanese soldiers during World War II? It's because if we don't stand up to declare that this cannot happen again, chances are it will. One thing that I would say, as a Zainichi Korean from Japan, born and raised in Fukuoka, is that it is so easy to become a nobody. When you don't have the opportunity to exercise your birthright, to tell your own story, your own history on your own terms, you can easily be made into a victim, into a nobody, into somebody who really doesn't matter, to whom a violation can happen, can be meted upon by the nation state, which declares that it is simply doing the work of national interest. And that is what happened to the Shibayama brothers and many of their colleagues. That is also what happened, surprisingly, and hard to believe, but that's exactly how it was argued. These hundreds and thousands of young, innocent women and girls from throughout the Asia Pacific were literally procured along with other military supplies to serve the Japanese soldiers during World War II. The important thing is that we must stand in solidarity with other people who are fighting to reclaim their human dignity.
I'm Heidi Gorka-Donald. I am both the Vice President and the Treasurer of our German-American Internee Coalition. On behalf of our group, I want to congratulate the Campaign for Justice, Redress Now for Japanese Latin Americans. The Commission's recommendation that the U.S., quote, provide integral reparation for human rights violations, including both material and moral dimensions, unquote, resonates with us and especially with me, since my family and I were among thousands of German ethnic families, legal residents of Latin America and the Caribbean who were swept into local detention camps, were held without hearings or legal recourse, and over 4,000 of us were brought to the United States for internment and, as with the Japanese Latin Americans, potential exchange. My family, my Costa Rican family of 7, were among them. And in the United States, the government deemed more than 300,000 residents, German-born residents of the United States, enemy aliens. They were required to carry certificates of identification. They had their property rights limited, their movements followed and limited as well. A number were held in detention, some in jails, many interned, and many were repatriated / exchanged. In 1948, 3 years after World War II ended, the last internee, a German, was finally released from Ellis Island. Feared collectively because of our German ethnicity, our civil liberties were abused by the United States government. We were not included in the Civil Rights Act of 1988, and Congress has never acknowledged the civil rights violations that we endured. Similar indiscriminate presumptions are being made today. Ethnicity, religion, nationality, or appearance is not enough to declare whole groups of people unwelcome in the United States. Our government needs to look at the past and learn from it. Thank you.
Greetings, my name is Catherine Toktakin. I'm the former director at the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights and an international migrant rights advocate. I applaud the decision from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and while we have much to do to see that justice is truly done in this case, I think it really is an inspiration after these many years to finally have this ruling. I think it's all the more important today in light of the human rights violations that we face internationally at the intersection of foreign and economic policies, migration, situations at borders played out against a framework of racism and xenophobia. The horrific conditions faced by a whole class of Japanese Latin Americans, the situations of detention, the manipulation of immigration laws, the barriers to citizenship and access to justice, the rampant discrimination, all of these are episodes and themes that are played out in the United States and around the world, and especially in situations of forced migration in the current era of global migration. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this case, from the experience of the people who had to go through so many years of discrimination and trauma. So I hope we all draw from that experience and also from the perseverance in this case, the length of time that it is still taking to achieve justice. It often does not happen just around the corner. So, it really is an inspiration, and really offer my congratulations to the claimants and their families, to their supporters, legal team, all who have fought so hard for this case and will continue to fight to see that justice is done. It really is an inspiration. Thank you.
Victory for Japanese Latin Americans. We, in the Italian American Studies Association, Western Regional Chapter, would like to extend our heartfelt congratulations to the Campaign for Justice. In a case that has been pending for 16 years, the IACHR has concluded briefly that the Shibayama brothers and all Japanese Latin Americans should rightly have been included for compensation in the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which they were not. This case thus has wide-ranging meaning for Italian Americans who 600,000 of them were likewise targeted as foreign nationals, though they had chosen to live in the U.S., denied the ability to complete their citizenship process, and then denied the rights guaranteed in the Constitution to all U.S. residents, citizens, and non-citizens alike. In the face of the federal government's continuing refusal to accept the consequences of its wartime violations, and of its current violations, which continue a similar pattern with regard to other immigrant groups of different ethnic origins, this reading by the IACHR takes on additional relevance. We see Latin Americans seeking asylum in the U.S. who are caged, separated from their families, and deported to hostile countries from where they cannot reach their countries of origins, and scapegoated mercilessly by the current administration as rapists and criminals, to name just one area which violates international norms. We hope this decision will lead to both a greater understanding by the public of the violations that took place during World War II, and also of what should be the policy of the United States toward asylum seekers and immigrants, and indeed of the poor and neglected in our own underserved communities, now and in the future. Again, we congratulate the Campaign for Justice on its courageous and relentless pursuit of justice and its considerable victory in this international arena, and hope it will prompt the United States government to act likewise with respect to compensating those who suffered unjustly and almost unbeknown to the general public at its hands during World War II.
Some people assume that the U.S. government just decided one day to give reparations to Japanese Americans who were detained in concentration camps. They don't know that it required a movement that took decades, first to recover and then to unite and wage a campaign against the U.S. government.
Many don't know that there were Japanese American incarcerees who were denied redress. People who died in the camps were denied. If your grandma, who spent 3.5 years behind barbed wire, died the day before Reagan signed the bill, she and her survivors were denied.
But the biggest group of people who were denied were the Japanese immigrants from Latin America and their children who were kidnapped and imprisoned in the U.S. to be used as pawns for POW exchange with Japan. Japanese Latin Americans who fought for redress alongside us during the 1980s were told they were ineligible because they were illegal aliens.
If they can call kidnapped Japanese Latin Americans illegal aliens, then that should show us how arbitrary legal status is. It should make us look twice today when the government rails against undocumented and DACA as illegal.
We demand that the U.S. government move quickly to pay equal reparations to the Japanese Latin Americans or to their survivors if those who deserve reparations have died due to years of government inaction.
Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice delayed is justice denied. Art Shibayama of San Jose courageously brought his case before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights after he was denied. Without reparations for Art, our victory is still not complete. In Art's memory and in his honor, we demand reparations for the Japanese Latin Americans.
Our struggle for truth and justice is not over. We are entering into a new stage for our work and facing new conditions and challenges, like how to educate and mobilize our communities during a pandemic and the outcome of the presidential and congressional elections. This milestone victory in our struggle has put the ball in the U.S. government's court, and we need them to comply with the Commission's decision. So please sign the online petition to build the pressure. Check our website and social media for the link to the petition. We also need your help to finally close the shameful chapter of U.S. World War II concentration camps and hostage exchange. So please keep in touch with us by following us on our social media and our website. But most importantly, please be healthy and safe. Thank you to all our participants today for sharing your experiences, expertise, and insights. And much gratitude to our supporters for doing the hard behind-the-scenes work to make this session possible.